Dear friends, we have today a different topic to be discussed that comes under the framework of post-positivist theories of international relations. Post-positivism is a very broad term uh, under which there are different categories of theories. You have from postmodernism, post-structuralism, feminism, post-colonialism, constructivism, critical theory. You have a broad range of theories that come under post-positivism. So let us have a broad understanding of what constructivism in international relations today. As you are all aware, constructivism in politics and international relations emerged in the late 1980s and 1990s. It emerged basically as an approach questioning the prevailing mainstream IR theories, particularly the structuralist theories like neo-realism, Marxism, neo-Marxism, and so on and so forth, along with contesting the liberal and neoliberal claims of what we call as theories of international relations. But constructivism has different traditions and schools of thought in different disciplines, not just in political science and international relations. In social theory, in general, constructivism has its modernist and postmodernist variants. Let us not assume that constructivism is a single theory. Rather, it is an umbrella of different perspectives and views, or you may call it as different traditions within this broad category of constructivism. In modernist version is often called traditional or conventional constructivism. Its postmodern variety or postmodern version is sometimes called critical constructivism. So please keep in mind that constructivism has different traditions. One, the conventional or traditional constructivism, which is of a modernist variety, and there is this critical constructivism, which belongs to the general category of postmodernist version. But generally, we place all these constructivist thoughts under the broad category or broad framework of post-positivist theories, for the simple reason that all these theories basically challenge the established notions of positivism, established notions about all claims of truth, claims of knowledge, and so on and so forth. But keep in mind that both critical constructivists and conventional constructivists, they challenge the mainstream political and IR theories. Of course, there are also fundamental differences in their approaches. Constructivism has its roots or intellectual traditions in philosophy, in education. Broadly, social theory has a very broad tradition of constructivism. The basic presumption of constructivism is that the only reality that we can know is that which is represented by human thought. So our thinking, our human thought plays an important role in terms of constructing a reality. So which means that the reality is not independent of our thinking like that. Reality is independent of human thought in its own way, but its meaning, or you may say that its representation is always mediated through a human construction. That's why that we say that realities are, in that sense, constructed by human beings, depending on um, the the way in which we can look at things. So, a running theme of all kinds of constructivist theories is that uh, actually they do not focus on simply on ontological reality. Ontological reality in the sense of the existence of beings. Rather, these theories focus on primarily of constructed reality, how realities are constructed by human mind or human brain. So, constructivism offers a new definition for knowledge and truth, and that forms a new paradigm that is essentially based on intersubjectivity instead of what we call in traditional or classical positivism, classical objectivity. Instead of objectivity, we have a kind of intersubjective understanding of things. Uh, we might have heard about this constructivist tradition in education, which has a particular place, constructivist pedagogy. Uh, it is seen essentially as a view of learning based on the belief that knowledge is not something that can be simply given by the teachers at the front of a classroom to students. And actually, students learn by fitting new information together with what they already know. Learners are the builders and creators of meaning and knowledge. Here, knowledge is seen as constructed by learners through an active mental process of development. So, the expression constructivist epistemology that was first used by a scholar in pedagogy called Rang Piaget, who lived um, in the 20th century. Actually, he was born in 1896. This construction of a particular methodology, or we may say that epistemology, was put in place by Piaget way back in 1967. He believed that learning happens by an active construction of meaning rather than by receiving it passively. That's an essential part of this participants technique, learner-centered pedagogical practices like that. So before we examine constructivism in international relations in detail, let us see how these theoretical developments in other social sciences, in other social science disciplines, inspired such a thinking. In philosophy and in sociology, there were debates that might have probably influenced constructivist thinking later. For example, in sociology, uh, Professor Anthony Giddens, way back in 1984, Giddens had proposed this concept of structuration as a way of analyzing the relationship between structures and actors. This is one of the preliminary things that we study in international relations, like along with the levels of analysis, agency structure question like that, whether agency determines structure or structure determines agencies and like that. According to Giddens, structures, when we make a reference to structures that imply the rules and conditions that guide social action, can be a constitution, it can be moral principles, it can be of anything of the sort that we identify within a social living, like a religion, caste, community, and so on and so forth. So according to Giddens, structures do not determine what actors do in any mechanical way. Actually, the relationship is in a different way. The relationship between structures and actors. I mean, the structures that we see from the point of view of a caste or community, and the members of the community being the actors. The relationship between the structures and actors that involves intersubjective understanding and meaning. Structures certainly constrain actors, but actors also can transform structures by thinking about them and acting on them in new ways. That's one point that we have to keep in mind. The notion of structuration comes out of this. It leads to a less rigid and more dynamic view of relationship between structures and actors like that. Perhaps what we can understand by way of this intersubjective or interrelationship between the structures and actors can be understood from the present dilemma of dealing with what we call the structure of a particular international context determined by the imperatives of a particular security, determined by a pathogen or a virus, and how actors who themselves have a kind of a responsibility in distancing themselves from this sort of a structure of the over presence of this virus and things like that. Without individual actors, this phenomenon of threat cannot be countered. Actually, you need to have collective action, but collective action has meaning only when the actors themselves cooperate in a significant way. So what I'm saying is that this principle of structuration is very important in the making of constructivist theory. This tradition has been very much used by many constructivist scholars, drawing a lot of inspiration from the writings of Max Weber and many others. Similarly, constructivism has deeper roots in philosophy. If you read the 18th century writings of Italian philosopher Vico, we can find its philosophical lineages. Vico says that the natural world is made by God, but the historical world is made by man. History is not some kind of unfolding or evolving process that is external to human affairs. Men and women make their own history. They also make states which are historical constructs. So states are artificial constructs or creations, and the state system is also artificial too. If it is made by man and women or men and women, and if they want to, they can change it and develop it as in different ways. That's how Vico explains it, the imprint of man on our history. So you have in another philosophical tradition in the writings of Immanuel Kant, who argued that we can obtain knowledge about the world, but it will always be a subjective knowledge in the sense that it is processed through, it is filtered through human consciousness. And the Kantian idea also had an impact on several others. Max Weber, for example, he emphasized that the social world, the world of human interaction, is basically different from the natural world of physical phenomena. Human beings, they rely on understanding of each other's actions and assigning meaning to them. Max Weber concluded that subjective understanding is the specific characteristic of sociological knowledge. So constructivists rely on such insights to emphasize the importance of meaning and understanding. That's very important in understanding what we call as constructivism too. So in social theory, constructivists emphasize the social construction of reality. Human relations, including international relations, consist of thoughts and ideas, and not essentially of material conditions and forces alone. According to constructivist philosophy, the social world is not something as a given. It is not something out there that exists independent of the thoughts and actions, thoughts and ideas of the people involved in it. So in that sense, it is not an external reality whose laws can be discovered by scientific research and explained by scientific theory, as positivists and behavioralists argued for some time. The social and political world is not part of nature, according to this thinking. And there are no natural laws of society or economics or politics. And history is not, in that sense, an evolving external process that is independent of human thought and human ideas. That means sociology or economics or political science or international relations or the study of history cannot be objective sciences in the strict positivist sense of the word. So everything involved in the social world of human beings, of men and women, is made by them. So the social world is, in that sense, a world of human consciousness, of thoughts and beliefs, of ideas and concepts, of languages and discourses of signs and signals, and understanding among human beings, especially groups of human beings such as states and nations, etc., etc. So the social world is, in that sense, from that perspective, an intersubjective domain. It's meaningful to people who made it and who live in it and who understand this is precisely because they made it and they are at home in it, they are a part of it. So the social world is partly constructed of physical entities, but it is the ideas and beliefs concerning those entities which are most important. What those entities signify in the minds of people. The international system of security and defense, for example, consists of territories, populations, weapons, and other physical assets. But it is the ideas and understanding according to which these assets are conceived, organized and used. Example, alliances, armed forces, enemy, front, etc., etc. The physical element is there, but it is secondary to the intellectual element, which gives it with meaning, plans it, organizes it, and guides it. So you find that in spite of, in the current scenario, in the current context of COVID-19 pandemic, the countries across the world, they keep all their weapons in full reserve, and they are encountering a new form of security from the understanding that the world is literally under a kind of a threat of its own making. Like, for example, a kind of, if you don't contain it, if you don't put it under control, the world will be in disaster, no matter how much weapons that you have. Weapons have meaning only when you have these what do you call it, the threats that you assume from the point of view of human beings becoming a threat like that. And now that you have a threat from within. So contrast between a materialist view held by neorealists and neoliberals and the ideational view held by constructivists, and we have to make a distinction between them. So according to materialist view, power and national interests are the main driving forces in international politics. Power is ultimately military capability, military power supported by economic and other resources. National interest is the self-regarding desire by states for power, security, or wealth, and like that. When power, interests, etc., are seen as material forces. So, in this view, ideas matter very little. So, in the ideational view held by constructivists, we say that constructivist thinking is basically ideational, the use of ideas, how ideas matter in the making of a reality. So, the starting premise is that the material world uh, is indeterminate and is interpreted within a larger context of meaning. Ideas thus define the meaning of material power. So the idea that the world is under threat because of this pandemic virus has replaced the idea that the world is under the threat of nuclear war. It's only a matter of replacing of this idea of a threat from a level of what we call as nuclear weapons to a level of a virus. It's a matter of a shift of emphasis. So this constructivist view of ideas is emphasized by several scholars, and most prominently by an IR scholar, Alexander Wendt, um, who popularized this concept in international relations. So the core ideational element upon which constructivists focus is intersubjective beliefs and ideas, conceptions and assumptions that are widely shared by many people. So the central, the core argument is that ideas must be widely shared to matter. If you don't accept a particular idea as important, definitely it will not matter to them. It depends where how you construct an idea as the most important thing, I think. So when you say that the WHO talks about the coronavirus as the most important threat to the world, it matters to the world for a variety of reasons. The simple reason that you have the records of the number of people coming under this threat and so on and so forth. It's not that the International Atomic Energy Agency's estimates of nuclear weapons in the hands of United States, Britain, and Russia, China, and so on and so forth. That actually don't matter at all in the present context. So constructivists generally agree that they agree with Max Weber that they need to employ interpretative understanding in order to analyze social action. So we have to fix the priorities uh, 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 from one time to another depending on the relevance of action. But the constructivists don't agree that it is possible to produce scientific explanations based on hypotheses, data collection, and generalizations. Even in the current context, perhaps many argue that the scientific explanations provided through hypothesis may not be accurate and so on and so forth in combating coronavirus and like that. You actually are not in the process of combating virus, but you are in the process of escaping from virus by allowing themselves to die out instead of using a medicine or a particular what we call a vaccine to prevent it and like that. It's a question of it's a matter of time for science to decide whether it can be done or not. But this is not about social science. This is not about the social realities. So on the other hand, constructivists rejected the notion of objective truth. Social scientists cannot discover a final truth about the world, which can be true across time and space. On the other hand, constructivists do make a lot of truth claims about the subjects they have investigated, while admitting that their claims are always contingent, partial interpretations of a complex world and things like that. So, as I said earlier, constructivism belongs to or constructivist thoughts belong to different conventional and critical constructivist categories. We have in the conventional categories a large number of scholars like Alexander Wendt, John Ruggie, Michael Barnett, Ted Hope, Martha Finnermore, and many others. Critical constructivists are much more skeptical, and they argue that truth claims are not possible because there is no neutral ground where we can decide about what is true. So what we call truth is always connected to different ways of thinking about the world. So truth and power cannot be separated. Indeed, the main task of critical constructivism is to expose that correlationship between truth and power, to criticize those dominant versions of thinking that claim to be true for all. So critical constructivists include a number of scholars like David Campbell, Jim George, James Derderian, R.B.J. Walker, Andrew Linklater, Ann Ticker, and several others. All emphasize that there is no neutral knowledge, and they all underline the inadequacies of a dualistic, that is, either or black and white thinking. They emphasize the ethical aspects of research. So this is a general introduction to what constructivists talk about. So let us come back to constructivism in IR. It became very prominent with the writings of several scholars, but as I said earlier, it was Alexander Wendt who popularized it in IR with his writings way back in 1980s. Perhaps the most widely discussed work of Alexander Wendt was written published in 1999, Social Theory of International Politics. So the core of Alexander Wendt's argument is a rejection of the neo-realist position. Basically, they are not only of a neo-realist position, but even the world system perspective and like that. The most important point is that these theories are essentially structureless theories. They argue that the structures determine actions of agents and their actions and like that. According to these theories of neo-realist position and like that, anarchy must necessarily lead to self-help. That's a kind of an argument. If that is the situation, what we think about the world today is different. For example, if we assume that there is anarchy in international relations, why is that these countries are not having a kind of a global level strategy to combat this pandemic? If these countries look at things from their own point of view of self-help, definitely the world will not be the same. So there should be a concerted global action to combat it. Whether it does or not cannot be decided a priori. It depends on the interaction between states. So in this process of interaction, the identities and interests of states are created. For example, for neo-realists, identities and interests are actually given. States know who they are and what they want before they begin their interaction with the other states and like that. Alexander Wendt says that it is the very interaction with others that create one structure of identities and interests rather than another. If one fine morning Trump decides that he should speak to the leader in North Korea, definitely the hostility between these two countries change. The other way around also, is the North Korean leader decides to meet President Trump with a shake hand and like that, definitely that makes a change in the conditions of the structure of relationship between them. So structure has no existence or causal powers apart from process. It is in the process that you have a kind of a construction of a particular reality. I mean, from the point of view of a structure of relationship. So states want to survive and be secure. Neorealists and constructivists agree on that point. But what kind of security policy follows from this? Wendt argues that we can only find out by studying identities and interests as they are shaped in the interaction between states. In concrete terms, Wendt himself writes somewhere that if the US and the erstwhile Soviet Union decided that they are no longer enemies, then the Cold War is over. This is exactly the word from Alexander Wendt. So it's a collective meaning that constitutes the structures which organize our action. So actions acquire identities by participating in such collective meaning. So West European states need not start power balancing against each other because the Cold War is over. 4 decades of cooperation would have helped them to formulate a new Europe, a new European identity of cooperation and friendship between them. You can say that the European Union, which emerged in the 1990s as a result of the Maastricht Pact, was not the end result of Cold War, but Cold War would have played a different role at that point of time. But they have a new understanding that if they stand together, they have something to gain out of it. So Wendt's 1999 work develops the argument introduced in the earlier articles which he wrote. So his point of departure is the same as Kenneth Walls' interaction between states in a system characterized by anarchy. But anarchy need not lead to self-help. That calls for further study of the discursive interaction between states in order to discover what specific culture of anarchy that has developed between them. So Wendt suggests interestingly 3 major ideal types of anarchy which we study generally in the political thought, political philosophy: Hobbesian, Lockean and Kantian anarchies. So in the Hobbesian culture, states view each other as enemies. The logic of Hobbesian anarchy is war of all against all. States are essentially adversaries, and war is endemic because violent conflict is the way of survival. Hobbesian anarchy, according to Wendt, dominated the state system until the 17th century. In the Lockean culture, states consider each other as rivals, but there is also restraint. States do not seek to eliminate each other. They actually recognize the other state's right to exist. So Lockean anarchy has become a characteristic of the modern state system after the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. So finally, in the Kantian culture, states view each other as friends. They settle disputes peacefully and support each other in the case of threat by a third party. A Kantian culture has more or less emerged among the consolidated liberal democracies after the Second World War. So these 3 different cultures of anarchy can be internalized in different degrees by different actors. That is, the way states view each other may be more or less deeply shared. And Wendt makes a distinction between 3 degrees of cultural internalization. The way we internalize these 3 notions, Hobbesian, Lockean and Kantian notions. The first degree is a relatively weak commitment to shared ideas. That is what we call as the Hobbesian anarchy. So the third degree is the highest commitment, the strong commitment. And Wendt says that constructivism is not merely about adding the role of ideas to existing theories of higher. Material power and state interests are fundamentally formed by ideas and social interaction. Therefore, states in an anarchic system may each possess military and other capabilities which can be seen as potentially threatening by other states. So social interaction between states can also lead to more benign and more friendly cultures of anarchy. So Wendt's analysis thus focuses on interaction between states in the international system, and he was not very much concerned about the role of domestic factors in the making of these. So that's how the Alexander Wendt's conceptualization goes like this. So there is another tradition of constructivism which is represented by Martha Finnermore. Finnermore offers another variant of constructivist analysis in her 1996 book, National Interest in International Society. Her starting point is the definition of states' identities and interests. But instead of looking at the social interaction between states, the focus in Finnermore is more on the norms of international society and the way in which they affect identities and interests. Identities and interests are, in that sense, defined by international forces, by the norms of behavior rooted in international society. The norms of international society are transmitted to states through international organization. This point is very much relevant today in the current international system. And these norms shape national policies by teaching states what their interests should be. She offers 3 case studies, for example, adoption of science policy bureaucracies by states after 1995, UNESCO's role in the making of a scientific, what you call a science policy and like that. So states' acceptance of rule-governed norms of warfare. If you add the current scenario to Finnermore's perspective, for example, the science policy of states as a result of the role of the interventionist role of WHO, which is very crucial today. And another interesting formulation is her acceptance, how states accepted the rule-governed norms of warfare. For example, the international commitments that we make out of the experience of the Red Cross, International Red Cross. It succeeded in prescribing what is appropriate behavior for civilized nations involved in war. You have heard about a number of instances of the Geneva Convention, the Vienna Convention, the Helsinki Conventions, how states should behave towards citizens when they engage in a war and like that. I think the International Red Cross played in that sense a role. The third important interesting case study offered by her was acceptance by the global south countries of poverty alleviation as central norms of economic policy. This shift from increasing production, economic growth to welfare improvement through economic redistribution, that became an agenda of institutions like World Bank. In fact, that was popularized by the then World Bank chief like Robert McNamara and others. Martha Finnermore argues that international norms prescribed by international organizations can definitely influence national guidelines by pursuing states to adopt these norms in their national policies. I think one classical instance could be how the WHO norms, World Health Organization's norms, do matter for national survival. How states take a lot of guidelines and norms and scientific information from these agencies to create a new secure conditions of social life in their respective countries and like that. So thus constructivists such as the Finner Moore, Alexander Wendt, they stress the importance of the international environment in shaping states' identities, their survival, etc., like that. So this is a very broad summary of the way constructivists look at international relations and international system like that. There are several criticisms put across against constructivists, particularly neorealists. They questioned the importance attached to norms. They say that these norms are routinely disregarded, drawing the attention of how nation states disregard the role of the norms put across by international agencies like United Nations and so on and so forth. Powerful states they themselves have violated the autonomy and integrity of weak ones. How these norms and ideas are violated. So neorealists are not ready to accept that states can easily become friends due to their social interactions and like that. Such a goal may be desirable according to them in principle, but they are not realizable in practice, they argued. So the Marxists and neo-Marxists also critique these constructivist thought for this reason that the structural realities make a difference in the conditions of life, and therefore agencies are under pressures of the structural realities like that. So constructivism offers in that sense an account of the politics of identity. If it proposes a way of understanding how nationalities, nationalism, ethnicity, race, gender, religion, sexuality, and other communities are involved in an account of politics. Understanding how identities are constructed, what norms and practices accompanying their production, and how they construct each other is a major part of the constructivist framework. Although nationalism, ethnicity, etc., are receiving more attention in the mainstream higher theory, attention to gender, sexuality, race, religion, etc., have received much less attention. Constructivism, in that sense, promises to deal with these issues, not merely because they are topical, but because as variants of identity, they are central to how constructivism generates understanding of social phenomena. So in short, constructivism in international relations marks a return to more sociological, historical, and practice-oriented forms of international relations scholarships. So where realists or neo-realists had reduced the social world to strategic interaction and so on and so forth, while they denied the historical factors and reduced the practical art of politics to utility maximizing calculation, constructivists, on the other hand, have reimagined the social world as a constitution of domains, reintroduced history as a realm of empirical reality, and so on and so forth. So constructivists, they say that states form more than a system, that they form a society. So they have great interest in international society. They stress on the intellectual distinctions, the cultural distinctions of different societies, of states, and like that. So I must summarize our discussion today with a kind of request that constructivist understanding of international relations cannot be studied on a single track, because there are different scholars working along different lines within constructivism. I have only touched a few aspects of constructivism today, like that. Their basic contention is that the structural arguments may not work well and the making of a system, because a system itself is constructed by agencies, and therefore we have to understand the structures and the agents or agencies in their intersubjective relationship, or understanding all these relationship between structures and agents in a mutually constitutive way, rather than one determining the other, and like that. Thank you very much, and we will proceed to the discussions on postmodernism and international relations in the next discussion. Thank you all. Have a good day.